Why can I say every word under the planet but that?
Oh my god. Okay.
Shannon's not ready for today.
I'm tired and yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Oh god.
Okay.
That was nice.
You're welcome.
Okay. Shelby, you want to do the intro?
Yeah. Hi, guys. You're listening to The Triad, where we're spooky but sensitive. I am Shelby.
I'm Hannah.
I'm Shannon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Today's gonna be super chaotic, sorry.
Yeah, it is. I'm gonna try to wrangle it into not chaos, though, like I always do.
Not gonna happen.
Yes, it fucking is. Do we have any announcements?
Yes, I have an announcement and a story. Is that allowed?
That's fine.
Yes,
yeah,
go for
that's
it.
fine.
My announcement. My cousin's just had a baby, and she's very cute, and I'm not going to say her name because I don't know that they want that, but anyway, she's very precious, and I love her.
Yay!
Number 2. There was a rabid skunk in my... Okay, here's what happened. So, I was working, and my family was in town visiting me, and I got a call from my mom that was just, like, very evasive, like, just park at the end of your... Because I have, like, a longish driveway. It was like, park at the end of your driveway. Just don't pull in any further. And I was like, okay, why? And she was like, don't worry about it. Just stay down there. Just pull in and stop and don't come any closer. And we'll just get in the car and leave. And I was like, why? And she's like, well, we had to call the police because there was a skunk in the driveway, but it was rabid and, like, flipping and seizing and foaming at the mouth and, like, pretty much on the verge of death. So my dad, well, first Kimberly tried to touch it.
Of course she
So my dad yelled at her. Yeah, well, okay, she thought it was like hurt.
Ah.
She didn't realize it had rabies.
Yeah.
So she was like trying to help it because it was little. It was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
So she was trying to help it. And then my dad, like my mom and dad pulled up in the driveway just as she was like about to get close to it. And my dad was like, get away from it! And then they called the police. Well, they called animal control, and animal control was like, yeah, we're busy. We're, I don't know, wrangling a different rabid animal. So my dad was like, okay, I'll just call the police. So he called the police, and they came, and they somehow captured it under a not Tupperware. I made the same mistake when I told you guys. Like a Rubbermaid container in my driveway. And then, like, put some heavy shit on top of it so it couldn't escape. And then it just started spraying in there.
Yeah.
So everything in my house smelled like skunk for a day and a half. And then it died. And then... I don't know if you guys have ever been to this place, but there's a place in the Northeast called the Christmas Tree Shops and That.
Yes.
I've been to, like, weird Christmas stores before. I don't know
It's not
if
a
it's
Christmas
the same.
store.
Okay.
They do not sell Christmas trees,
Okay.
surprisingly.
Then no, I have not been there.
Anyway, we were, like, fucking around, and we were like, oh, we should get a little headstone for the skunk. So we were looking in these, like, 75-cent... They were fake rocks. They weren't even, like, real rocks that had, like, sayings and stuff on them. And there was one that said, it is what it is. And that's the one I wanted to get, but apparently that was too soon. So we ended up getting the one that said peace. Anyway, we buried the skunk, and there is so much baking soda in my driveway because we were trying to suck up the stink of dead rabid skunk. Anyway, the end. That was
Great. Great. Okay.
I don't even know what to say to that.
Yeah.
Other than, why was it too soon?
Yeah.
Because Kim would have lost it if I... Well, the other one I really liked was Forgive
Kim.
and Forget. I thought that was pretty appropriate, but... I don't know.
You know, it's fine.
Oh, Oh, man. Okay.
Just Farley things.
Yeah,
Just
just
Farley
Farley things. Yeah. Shelby, do you have any announcements?
I moved yesterday, so now me and
Yay!
Shannon live in the
Woo!
same house,
Yes.
apartment, building thing.
Same converted attic.
Yep. And
Yep.
I'm very tired and very sore
Yep.
because carrying, 20 pieces of furniture up 5 flights of stairs that are not even or well situated.
And very steep.
Very steep and very small, and
Yeah.
it was a time. But we got it done
Yeah.
without...
We still have one really heavy box that we forgot to make her dad move.
Amazing.
Maisie!
Boof. How are the pets dealing with each
Oh,
other?
well, see, because I have, 2 trips planned in, the next 2 weeks, and I will be gone for most of this month, I left Yuki at home with my parents
Yeah.
until September. So,
Yeah.
the pets are great.
Yeah, that seemed better than
Yeah.
bringing
then-
Yuki here to acclimate with Shelby for 3 days and then be left with just me and Maisie for a week. So that didn't seem like a good idea.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I don't think she would have
Especially because
appreciated that.
No.
Yuki doesn't like other people, and she doesn't
Yeah.
like other animals, and
Yeah.
she's a demon.
Yeah, this will be fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be a great time when she eventually shows up here in a month.
Yeah.
Less than a month, but yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, as of right now, we're recording in different rooms. We might be able to rig something up to where we can record in the same room at some point, but we didn't have time to fiddle with any of that, so.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I am locked in my bedroom right now.
And I'm at my desk in
Yep.
the living room. And my dog is somewhere. I don't actually know where she is. She's somewhere.
Yep.
Barking at things.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think I don't know if I tore something in my shoulder or if my muscle's just really mad, but it still hurts from picking up my
Yeah.
desk yesterday. So that's
I
fun.
have, bruises all over my knees. That
Yeah.
sounds not what I meant it to sound like. It's from moving furniture. Okay.
Well, yeah.
That's what I thought you meant.
That's what I thought you meant.
Look, okay, I worked at a place where we had a "that's what she said" button that we would push every time someone said anything remotely "that's what she said," and so now my brain is just hardwired for that, okay? It's fine.
Gross.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
Okay. Yeah. Okay, is there anything else we need to discuss before we start the actual episode?
fine. No.
No.
No? Okay. Shelby, what are we talking about?
Okay, so there is a very bad PowerPoint in the episode 58 folder that I made. If you would like to go there.
I don't know if I know what this is.
Huh. Punch my microphone.
Yeah, I know.
Everyone take a drink. I can't help it. I have no control over my flappy arms.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know that I... Oh, I know this.
Yeah,
I feel like
okay.
I do, but I can't place it. You
All
know?
right. So,
I don't know a lot about it, but I know some things and stuff.
so today we're going to be talking about the Bone Wars, which is also the feud between Cope and Marsh, or the Cope-Marsh feud, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter. So my sources are 90% Wikipedia, and then PBS.com, and I watched the Drunk History episode on this.
There we go.
Oh my
So-
god, I'm gonna watch that after this.
Yeah. But yeah, if you want to go to slide 2,
Okay.
this is Edward Drinker Cope. So he...
Wait, I have a question, and you might
Yes.
not know the answer. Is Drinker his middle name, or was that a family name that they just slapped on there for fun?
I believe it is his middle name.
Okay, what the fuck? Is that
Well,
like...
well, okay, so the other guy's name is Othniel Charles Marsh.
Huh?
Wait, we gotta go back to Drinker really quick. Were his parents just like, yeah, he looks like he's gonna be a big drinker. Oh, let's name him that. That's so clever. Or what?
I
I don't
mean,
know.
I wouldn't be surprised, but it was 1840, so who frickin' knows?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, that's all. His hair looks a
Yeah.
little bit like he got electrocuted right before this and tried to comb it down.
A little bit, yeah.
Well, if you, like, hop over to slide 3 real quick, look at that dude's beard. And
Oh, I
that's
know.
Othniel.
I was saving it for then.
Yeah, that's Othniel. Or however the
It's like...
frick you say it. It's Othniel is his first name. I will be calling him Marsh the whole time.
That makes sense.
He's
Yep.
got that Rutherford B. Hayes beard where it's trimmed in the middle and then they let the sides do whatever they want.
Yeah, it's a time. Anyway, Edward Drinker Cope. Back to that dude. He was born in 1840, and he was the eldest son of Alfred and Hannah Cope. And then his mom died when he was 3 years old, and then he had a stepmother, Rebecca Biddle, who filled the maternal role, and apparently, like, they got along. He didn't even remember his birth mother, obviously, because he was 3. So, anyway, that's his family. Doesn't matter. So, his father, Alfred, was an Orthodox member of the Religious Society of Friends, also known as the Quakers.
Yeah.
The Quakers! I got
Yeah.
a friend's meeting house near my house.
Do you?
I
Do they
There
still
are
have
Quakers.
meetings?
Yeah, there are lots of Quakers up here.
I don't know why I didn't know that, like, Quakers is still a thing.
Yeah.
Like, I know that it
Shakers are
is.
not a thing anymore. There are 3 Shakers left, and they won't let anyone come talk to them right now because of COVID.
That's fair. It's one of those things that, like, I know the Quakers still exist, but I don't because I don't live in the Northeast. You know?
It's just like such a New England thing.
It
that,
is.
like,
It is.
Quakers.
Right. But yeah, anyway, so Edward Cope's father, Alfred, was a member of, or he was like an Orthodox member of the Quakers, and he operated a lucrative shipping business. And he was a philanthropist who gave a lot of money to the Society of Friends. He also gave quite a bit of money to the Philadelphia Zoological Gardens and the Institute for Colored Youth. So, basically, the dude was rich. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
And so Cope came from a rather rich family. But yeah, and so the Copes began teaching their children to read and write while they were very young. And then they took Edward on trips across New England and to museums, zoos, and gardens. And this is where Cope's interest in animals started. And he also did have like a natural artistic ability, supposedly. And so that's also when that became like apparent to his family. And so at age 9, Edward was sent to day school in Philadelphia. And then at 12, he attended a boarding school, like a Quaker boarding school, at Westtown. Or I guess the school was called Westtown. It was in Pennsylvania. I should have gotten a glass of water before we started this. Okay. Edward Cope was sent to this Quaker boarding school. It cost his family quite a lot of money. It was like $500 in tuition each year. Which, it was 1840 and I didn't do the math on that, but it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so basically Edward studied algebra, chemistry, scripture, physiology, grammar, astronomy, and Latin, as you do in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And then basically, Edward was a not the best student. We'll go with that. He got in trouble a lot for like his personality. He was argumentative and he thought school was boring and he didn't like it. And so he was just a problem child. But he would send letters home regularly asking for a larger allowance. And he was very good at manipulating his father into giving him money. And according to biographers, Edward was a bit of a spoiled brat.
Kind of sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
Right? So, he, like, later on in his schooling, he began to take, like, a deeper interest into biology, and he studied a lot of natural history texts in his spare time, and, like, while he was at school, he would frequently visit the Academy of Natural Sciences. But yeah, so that was, he basically just showed a strong interest in biology and natural sciences. But because of his bad conduct at school and everything, his father basically, like, brought him back home for a summer break and then never sent him back to boarding school. So in 1856, his father basically attempted to turn his son into a gentleman farmer, which is what he considered a wholesome profession that would bring enough profit so that, like, Edward would be able to lead a comfortable life. But Edward did not like that. So he basically, because basically Alfred had, like, set up a farm for Edward to run. So, Edward's letters to his father basically expressed his desire for a more professional scientific career, and he found farming to be dreadfully boring. Which, I mean, he's a gentleman farmer, so it's not like he actually did the farming, but it's fine.
Yeah, that's like, isn't that like
a
you
code
own a
word
bunch
for
of...
Yes.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
was about to say.
Yes,
You
it is.
own people
Yeah.
who do
Yeah.
the farm work.
That's a code word for being a slave owner.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but yeah, instead of working the farm that his father bought for him, Edward rented out the land and used the income from renting out the land to further his scientific endeavors.
Okay.
So, eventually his father gave in and paid for Edward's university classes, and so Edward attended the University of Pennsylvania in 1861 and 1862, and he studied comparative anatomy under Joseph Leidy, who was one of the most influential anatomist. Yeah. Why can I say every word under the planet but that?
Under the planet.
Welcome to my friggin' world.
Anyway, Joseph Leidy
an
was an
anatomist.
anatomist and paleontologist, and he was highly influential, and Cope basically became his, like, apprentice. And then Cope also asked his father to pay for a tutor in German and French so that he could read scholarly works in those languages.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. But basically, under Leidy's urging, Edward, who from now on I'm going to be calling him Cope. So, but yeah. So, Cope joined the Academy of Natural Sciences, and he got a job with them recataloging the herpetological collection. And basically he just, like, got his foot in the door, met a bunch of people within the, like, scientific community, worked with a bunch of people, and then in 1861 he published his first paper on Salamandridae classification, and over the next 5 years he published primarily on reptiles and amphibians.
All right.
So,
Listen, I'm so happy for scientists, and I like that what they do, and, you know, keep it up. But oh my god, that sounds so boring. I almost
Right.
fell asleep when you were reading not for me. Not my cup of tea. But
I
you
feel
know,
that.
you do you, scientists. I love you. I support you. Just, you know, I don't need to be included. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, he like published a bunch of works, and they were published by the Philosophical Society that he was part of, and so, yeah, blah blah blah. Doesn't matter. He then spent a couple years traveling across Europe, visiting museums again, meeting other scientists, getting his name out there. But also, he traveled across Europe in order to avoid being in the Civil War.
Drafted.
Drafted, that's the word. I was going to say conscripted.
That's the same thing.
I am aware, but then my brain short-circuited.
So he was a draft dodger. There are a lot of draft dodgers, I'm realizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you were really
yeah.
rich, you could buy like an Italian or a Scotsman to go do the
Yeah.
job for you.
True.
Yeah, see, but he sent a letter home to his father where he was like, no, I'm totally coming back and I'll be in the war. I'm not
I love
like
the
dodging the
war."
draft. I'm not doing this. Of course I'm going to come back. I'm just doing this to further my studies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then he came back after the war ended, so it's fine.
What? The war is over?
Yeah.
Oh man, darn it. I was just about to join the war.
Yeah, I was totally going to do my part. Yeah. So he did that. And then when he returned from Europe, his family basically got him a job as a teacher or as the professor of zoology at Haverford College, which was a small Quaker school. And the family had like philanthropic ties to the school. So basically they like bribed the school to give him a job. So,
I mean, that still happens with schools.
oh, 100%.
Mostly with admissions, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, remember all those rich people that went to jail for that?
yeah.
Yeah.
I almost covered that once, but
Aunt Becky?
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a really good documentary about it on Netflix.
There
right?
is.
It's on Netflix?
Yes, it's like
Yes.
called The Admission Scandal or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very self-explanatory.
Yes.
Yes. But yeah, the college also awarded Cope an honorary master's degree so that he could have that professor position. So, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. Anyway, side 3. On
Okay.
to Othniel Charles Marsh.
Look at that dude!
Yes, he's beautiful.
Like, people say that, like, all these millennials are naming their kids weird things, but, like, have you seen the names for the 1800s?
I'm
Like,
sorry,
Have you
but
ever
white
heard
people...
what fucking Puritans used to name their children?
That
it was
too.
like dirt and perseverance and shit like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. White people have been giving their kids weird names for a long time. Okay,
Yeah.
it's not a new phenomena.
No, it's not. Like,
Also, like, we can only have so many, like, Marys and Kates and
Okay, back off.
John.
Mary's one of my favorite names.
Okay, but you're Catholic, so
I am Catholic!
so
It
like
means a lot to me, okay?
it's fine. It's fine. Anyway, Othniel, who I will call Marsh forever because I don't want to say that. Also, I'm probably saying it wrong.
I don't know how else you could say it.
Yeah, I really...
Like, that seems right to me.
Right? Like, I don't know what you want me to do with that. Those
Yeah.
are letters that don't go together. So,
Yeah.
anyway, he was born in 1831 in Lockport, New York.
Wait.
What is that?
Hold on.
What just happened?
1 second.
You're looking at how to pronounce this name.
What the fuck?
Interesting from mispronounced biblical names too, so make sure to stay tuned and consider subscribing for more.
What the fuck is this? Hold on 1 second.
What are you doing?
Othniel.
Apparently it's
Othniel.
Othniel with an F.
Othniel. Then why is it a TH? Go away.
Because fuck you. I don't know.
That
Anyway,
voiceover guy sounded like the voiceover guy for, like, a horror movie trailer. He sounded
Right?
so scary.
I did not
I
enjoy
felt
that.
like he was trying to use his sexy bedroom voice, but he really misjudged the tone of that video.
Yeah, that did not work.
I'm a little creeped out.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was very concerned. I thought you were doing something for your for your notes, and I was like, what the fuck is this? Like,
No, I was trying to look up how to say his name.
Yeah,
but
I figured that out.
There
It
was a
just took
VRBO
a minute.
commercial, and then there was that scary man.
yeah. Oh.
Anyway, Marsh, born in New York, to a family of modest means. Basically his father was a farmer, and his mother was the younger sister of a banker and philanthropist. Why can't I say words today? But his mother was a Peabody, if that makes...
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she also died of cholera when Marsh was like 2. So basically Marsh got all of his financial backing from his uncle. So that's what allowed him to get a formal education, and he graduated from Phillips Academy in 1856, and he then went on to Yale College, where he got his Bachelor's of Arts degree with honors in 1860. There's a lot less information on Marsh's background because he wasn't rich. That's
Makes sense. All right.
100% the reason they don't know anything about him is because he wasn't rich.
Yeah.
So, and then he received a Berkeley scholarship from Yale, and he used that to study geology, mineralogy, and chemistry. And then he earned his master's from Yale in 1863. So he then went on to study paleontology and anatomy in Berlin. So there's that. He also did that during the Civil War. But I don't think I think his was genuinely like to study and not to avoid the war.
Well, because what year was he born?
He was born in 1831.
Yeah, so he already would have been 30 whenever the war started. They weren't really going after 30-year-olds right at the beginning.
Yeah.
They were trying to get the young people.
Yeah, and he was like in school from 1862 to 1865 in Berlin. And
yeah,
his was like he was in school, not I'm gonna just travel around
Wander
Europe
around.
and visit
Yeah.
museums.
Yeah.
Like it was, yeah. So anyway, and then in 1866 he returned to the United States, and he was appointed professor of vertebrate paleontology at Yale University. So he was actually the first professor of paleontology in the United States. Fun fact.
Cool.
Which is kind of cool, and he did it on his own merits. Fun fact.
Yeah. Unlike the other guy.
Not that I'm hating on Cope, but Marsh at least didn't buy his way in.
Yeah.
But it's cool. Anyway, so that same year, the Peabody Museum of Natural History at Yale was founded with a donation of $150,000 from George Peabody. So basically Marsh just like talked to his uncle and was like, hey, wanna make a museum? Go for it. Anyway, and then Marsh served as a trustee for the Peabody Museum and was one of its original 3 curators, which makes sense. I mean, his uncle did.
Is this the Peabody of the Peabody Opera House?
Probably not.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it is not. Look, Peabody was a common last name, apparently.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's really all the background we have on Marsh, as far as like how he got his job. Anyway. If you want to go to slide 4. So basically, these 2 men were essentially in the same field, and so they knew each other, and at first, their relationship was fine. They got along well enough. I wouldn't say they were friends in any way, but, you know, they ran in the same scientific fields, so, yeah. They originally met in Berlin in 1864 and actually spent several days together, and they even named like species in their research after each other.
Aw, that's so cute.
Yeah. So they got along. We'll go with that.
Real quick, I just Googled it. The Peabody Opera House. It's called the Stifle now. It's not even the Peabody anymore. It was named that
Stiefel.
Stiefel, whatever. It was named that after the Peabody Energy Company.
Oh.
Not after, like, a person. And that is probably not the same Peabodys. Because those were based, like, the Peabodys she's talking about were more New England-y. And
Yeah, they were New York.
yeah.
So.
Well,
And
is
then
it
this-
Peabody from Portal 2?
No.
Never mind. Goodbye.
Yeah, this Peabody is from Chicago. So, they're not the same.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay.
go ahead.
Moving on. So, yeah, over time, their relations soured, I guess. Or basically, they didn't get along because they both had strong personalities. Cope was known to be, quote, pugnacious and possessed a quick temper. Whereas Marsh was slower and more methodical and introverted. And slower, not obviously cognitively, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Just, like, more chill.
Yeah. Yeah, he was more laid back.
Yeah.
But both of them had a quarrelsome nature and were naturally distrustful of people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. They both had fairly decent upbringings, but okay. But yeah. So their differences also, like, extended into the scientific realm in that Cope was a supporter of neo-Lamarckism while Marsh supported Charles Darwin's theory of evolution.
Okay.
So basically they just had a lot of differences. They didn't get along. Their personalities were opposite. But yeah. And then even, like, when they were getting along, they had a tendency to, like, look down on each other. So yeah. And basically, as one observer put it, the patrician Edward Cope may have considered Marsh not quite a gentleman, and the academic Othniel Marsh probably regarded Cope as not quite a professional.
So they were both snobs about the other person, but in very different ways.
Yeah. Basically, one was like, well, I'm smart, and I got here on my own accord, and the other one was like, yeah, but I'm rich.
Yeah.
So
I have better manners
Just
than you do.
about
I know
sums up
etiquette.
society.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, society at
Yeah.
the time, yeah, 100%. Well, actually, even today.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, so on one occasion, both of the why can't I speak? The scientists had gone on a fossil collecting expedition to a, like, marl pit that Cope owned in New Jersey, and some, like, fossils had been discovered there. And back to Joseph Leidy that Cope studied under, he had been the one to, like, describe those fossils. And this was actually, like, one of the first American dinosaur finds, and those pits were still, like, super rich with fossils. And so both of these guys, Marsh and Cope, went there to study the fossils, discover them, all of that. And at the time when they, like, were leaving the pit, they, like, left on good terms, but Marsh then secretly bribed the pit operators to divert future fossil finds to him instead of Cope, even though Cope owned the pit.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, that didn't go over too well.
Yeah.
And they began attacking each other in papers and publications, and basically their personal relationship, like, went down real fast from there. So, yeah, basically everything they did from this point on, it was like one of them would discover something and the other one would be like, yeah, but you put his head on the wrong side and that's his tail, and, like, shit like that. Mm-hmm. So, this was essentially the start of the Bone Wars. So, yeah.
Get it. It kind of looks, and this reminded me of the war. That guy second from the left in that picture looks like he lost his leg, but it's just tucked behind him weird. Do you see it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I lost my leg in the Bone War. They took my bone.
Yeah. So this isn't, like, obviously, a real war. This is their feud.
I know.
Um,
I know. I'm just saying. Wouldn't that be funny if you survive the Civil War without a scratch, and then you're in the fake Bone War, and then you lose a limb?
lose a limb.
Funny.
Yeah, I mean...
Sorry, I lost my steam there. I don't know if you could and then you lose your leg.
Oh, man.
But yeah, anyway, so this was, like, the start, or, like, the kind of, like, catalyst for their relations going, like, super downhill. Basically, Marsh bribing the pit operators, but then Cope also, in turn, began collecting fossils in what Marsh considered to be his private bone hunting turf in Kansas and Wyoming. So that didn't help anything either. But also, that was kind of just, like, Marsh considered it his turf.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't actually, obviously. So, but, you know, basically, it's two haughty men, two middle-aged white men going at each other. Big surprise. Anyway, slide 5. This is basically the time period of 1872 to 1877. These are their, like, expeditions that they did.
Mm-hmm.
So, they both turned their professional attentions towards the American West, because they had heard word of large fossil finds. So, again, this was kind of like, how do I describe this? The gold rush, but for bones.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Cope used his influence in Washington, D.C. to get a position on the U.S. Geological Survey under Ferdinand Hayden. And so this position didn't offer a salary, but it basically gave Cope the opportunity to collect fossils in the West and publish his finds. And basically, he didn't get a salary, but the government essentially just, like, paid his way to do all of that.
It's kind of like an unpaid internship.
Yeah, basically. So, you know. And then Cope had a flair for dramatic writing, which suited Hayden, who needed to make a popular impression with the official survey reports. So he took him along.
Real quick, just a question. I'm getting them mixed up. Is Cope or Marsh the more academic guy?
Cope is the rich guy.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That's what I
Not
needed.
the academic one. He
Okay.
just wrote pretentiously.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes. So in June of 1872, Cope set off on his first set off on his first trip to go observe the Eocene bone beds of Wyoming for himself.
Okay.
And this essentially caused a rift between Cope, Hayden, and Leedy, because they were the three who were like part of this U.S. Geological Survey. But it was because Leedy had originally been the one who got all of the fossils from Hayden's collection and from these bone beds.
Mm-hmm.
But then when Cope joined the survey, he went hunting for fossils on this land, and it was what Leedy had considered his territory. Basically, there's a lot of drama amongst the paleontological community.
Yeah, it seems like a big, like, turf war over public land.
Yep. Yeah, basically.
Or at least government-owned land.
Right. Which, I mean, I guess it makes sense because whoever finds it first gets it named after them,
Yeah.
gets published, and so, like, you're the
Yeah.
one who gets the notoriety from
Oh
it.
no, I
so,
get
like,
why. I just think it's hysterical.
Yeah, it's very stupid, but it is kind of like the gold rush, and whoever gets there first, whoever discovers it first, like,
Yeah.
you get all the benefit from it. So, like, I understand why you would want it to be like, nah, this is my land, but also. Anyway. But yeah, so Cope was basically hunting for fossils in what Leedy considered to be his territory at the same time that Leedy was collecting fossils. And so there was some tension there. And so Haydn attempted to like smooth things over. And so this is a letter that he wrote to Leedy, basically trying to explain what happened. But basically, Haydn said, I asked him not to go into that field, that you were going there. He laughed at the idea of being restricted to any locality and said he intended to go whether I aided him or not. I was anxious to secure the cooperation of such a worker as an honor to my corps. I could not be responsible for the field he selected, inasmuch as I pay him no salary and a portion of his expenses. You will see, therefore, that while it is not a pleasant thing to work in competition with others, it seems almost a necessity. You can sympathize. Which is very much a way of saying, I told him not to, but he did it anyway, get over it.
Yeah.
So,
I love how petty people have always been.
Mm-hmm.
right.
It's beautiful. It's poetic.
It really is. It really is. But yeah, anyway, so that whole thing happened, and there were tensions and all of that. And then Cope also got a tip from a geologist, Fielding Meek,
Why do all these people have weird names?
because it's
the old times.
Like, all of them. I know, but, like, there are a lot of times where we're talking about, like, people from that era. They don't all have weird names. Usually half of them are named John. Like...
You are correct. Yeah.
I think in your family of 19 kids, you get to pick one kid that has, like, a super ridiculous name. And you put all of your hope on that kid, and you're like, come on. Just, like...
You get to be the paleontologist.
Yeah, you get to be the paleontologist. The rest of you, good luck living through infancy.
Yeah.
Right.
You get to be a coal miner. You have to be a farmer.
Yeah.
You're going to join the priesthood.
Exactly.
Yeah, so Fielding Meek gave Cope a tip of reports of bones that he had found near the Black Buttes station and the railroad. So Cope found this site and some skeletal remains of dinosaurs. He dubbed them Agathomus sylvestris. Anyway. So, basically, he found a bunch of bones.
Yes.
He was the first one to find them, so he named them. Again, that's what you do when you're a paleontologist.
Mm-hmm.
And then Cope believed that he had the full support of Haydn and the Geological Survey, so he then traveled to Fort Bridger, only to find that the men, wagons, horses, and equipment that he expected were not there.
Whoops.
So maybe make sure you have full support before you go and find some bones. But he was like, no, I made this really cool discovery that, like, my friend told me about. So, like, you guys support me, right? Yeah, totally. But yeah, so he was out there at Fort Bridger. He managed to get together an outfit of people, like, at his own expense. It consisted of 2 teamsters, a cook, and a guide, and then, like, 3 men from Chicago who were interested in studying with him. Which, actually, maybe the Peabodys are the same Peabodys. I don't know. We would have to trace that way far back, and I don't feel
I
like
don't
it.
think
So,
they are.
yeah. But, see, because it turns out that 2 of the men from Chicago that went on this expedition with Cope were actually employed by Marsh. So, when Marsh found out that 2 of his own men were taking Cope's money, he got real mad. And so these two men basically tried to assure Marsh that they were still his men, and one of them even suggested that he took the job in order to lead Cope away from the good fossils. However, Marsh was not exactly a great businessman. And so he had a hard time in like getting firm agreements and payments like to his workers, and so there is some, what is the word I'm looking for? There is some...
Are you looking for evidence? Is that the word?
Theories.
Theories. There we go.
There are some theories that I cannot function today. Okay. Anyway, there are some theories that these men actually took the job just because they were looking for work that actually paid.
Yeah.
So, anyway, this expedition took them through rugged country that only Haydn had surveyed, and basically Cope and these men discovered dozens of new species, and it was good for them, and they like made lots of progress, found a bunch of stuff, did a bunch of scientific stuff, but one of Marsh's men accidentally forwarded a bunch of like Marsh's material to Cope instead, because keep in mind this man is working for both of them. So he was sending like fossils back to Marsh, but he was on this expedition with Cope, so he accidentally sent some of Marsh's stuff to Cope.
Gotcha.
So when
Whoops.
Cope yeah, so when Cope received those fossils, he actually did the right thing and sent them back to Marsh, but the damage had already been done to their relationship, because Marsh essentially took it as like, you stole my man, you're stealing my fossils, like, get the fuck out of here. So anyway,
Ooh, Shelby, you can cuss now.
I can, and I can have like real opinions.
Yes.
Wow.
You're
Wow.
free!
Freedom. Anyway, so basically that was kind of like the final straw in them possibly having any sort of like cordial relationship. And so by 1873, they were just openly hostile to each other.
Yeah.
So basically, if you would like to go to slide 6, Leedy, Cope, and Marsh, so Leedy, Cope, and Marsh were making great discoveries of ancient reptiles and mammals in the western bone beds. They had a tendency they would like discover these bones and then like send a telegram immediately to the east and to like the Survey Corps or whoever they were working with at the time to describe their finds, but they wouldn't publish a full account of what they found until after returning from their trips. And so it became a problem because a lot of the times they were discovering the same things just in different areas, because obviously there's more than one of each type of dinosaur, like duh.
Yeah.
And so and because they weren't publishing it, they weren't realizing that they were discovering the same things. And so yeah, basically Cope and Marsh occasionally knew that they were discovering and collecting things that had already been found by the others, but they didn't care, so they were just giving these things like names on their own terms and being like, no, I totally found this dinosaur first, and or like just passing them off as two different fossils. So in case you were wondering why we had to go back a couple of years ago and be like, no, we have to rename all these dinosaurs, it's probably because of these two.
Yeah.
Also Leedy, but like he wasn't in the feud, so whatever. But as it like turned out, a lot of Marsh's names were valid because he published them first, and so a lot of Cope's names for these fossils were not. And so, of course, that again causes some drama.
Yeah.
Marsh also found a new species that he put into a new order of mammals, and that was the Cynoceria. I don't know scientific words. Doesn't matter. But yeah, so because of this, because basically Marsh was able to get his verified first, I guess, Cope was humiliated and powerless and blah blah blah. You know, white men don't like that.
Nope.
So instead, he studied a broad analytical study where he proposed a
You
new
really are
plan.
struggling today.
I really am. He proposed a new plan of classification for the Eocene mammals, and this classification would have completely discarded Marsh's names in favor of Cope's. So
he tried to get everything reclassified so that his own names would be used, basically.
yes,
Oh my god.
yes, he did.
Okay.
Yeah. So, in the midst of all of this arguing over classification and names and all of that, they returned to the West for more fossils. So, Marsh made his final trip to the West in 1873. This one was backed by Yale, obviously, because that's where he worked. He was a professor. But this ended up being his last trip because basically he wasn't a good businessman, and so he wasn't good with money, and so he essentially had these really expensive expeditions, and they were lavish, and the school was concerned about that, and so for this last one he made all of the students pay their own way, and so the trip wasn't as expensive. It basically only cost Yale about a little less than $2,000, whereas all of his previous expeditions had been close to $15,000.
Damn.
Which is around $200,000 in modern currency.
Mm-hmm.
So, after this point, Yale was basically maybe no more expeditions for you because you don't know how to spend money in a good way. And obviously, not all the students could pay their way. And so from this point on, Marsh basically just enlisted the services of local collectors, and he would have the bones sent to him and he would study them. But yeah, so Cope then was also out in the West in 1872. And he continued to go out west and do his own thing and collect his own bones. But he also found a way of paying his way because he got a job with the Army Corps of Engineers. And so he used that job to go out to the West and collect bones. But because he also had to do that, he had to tag along on their stuff. And so he couldn't collect wherever he wanted. So he... basically up until 1872 they both kind of did their own thing, went wherever they wanted, but at this point Marsh wasn't able to go because Yale told him not to, and then Cope had this job, so he had to go wherever the Army Corps of Engineers sent him, and so he could in his free time look for bones, but that's all that he was able to do. So yeah. And then, if you would like to go to slide 7, both of them in the mid-1870s turned their attention towards the Dakota Territory in the Black Hills. And this was because there had been a discovery of gold, and then in the discovery of gold, people had also discovered fossils, so all of the scientists also made their way towards the Black Hills. So, obviously, this increased Native American tensions, and so Marsh, who was the academic one, because I have to remind myself of this every once in a while, so Marsh wanted fossils that were found in that region. So he involved himself in Army Indian politics. And so he gained the support of Chief Red Cloud, and that's what this is a picture of the Sioux, to prospect on their land. And in turn, Marsh promised Red Cloud payment for the fossils collected and that he would return to Washington, D.C. and lobby on their behalf about their improper treatment. Mm-hmm. So he was able to get all of these fossils, and then he was able to do... There was a feud between, like, different Native American tribes, and so he got all the fossils. Why? He got all of these fossils and then was able to get out before this feud essentially started. And then it caused, like, all these problems amongst the Native Americans. And so he basically just, like, reaped all the benefits and didn't have any of the negative anything. However, right. Yeah. However, for his part, he did lobby the Interior Department and President Grant on behalf of Red Cloud.
That's good.
So he did kind of fulfill his end of the bargain, but it was more... His motives behind it were more so that he could make a name for himself against the, like, Grant administration. So it was... I mean, he did his part on the agreement, but also it was for his own benefit, so...
Yeah.
But then, by 1875, both Cope and Marsh took a pause in their collecting because they both were experiencing financial strain because they had both essentially, like, lost their backing. And they had so many fossils that they had collected that they had such a large, like, backlog in their catalog that they had to go through and actually, like, catalog them. So...
Dang.
What?
I said, dang!
Yes. But yeah, so they both took a pause on, like, expeditions, all of that. But then, before the end of the 1870s, they would go back to the West because there were new discoveries made. Slide 8. So, that was basically, like, 1872 to 1877. So those were their, like, early finds and early expeditions. So now we're into 1877 to 1892, and this is when they both went to the Como Bluffs. So these were the new things that they heard about and found. So basically in 1877, Marsh got a letter from a school teacher in Colorado. This teacher's name was Arthur Lakes. Finally, someone with a normal name. But
I don't know. He is named after a noun. How normal is that?
That's true. But basically, he reported that he had been out hiking in the mountains and he discovered massive bones embedded in the rock. He also said that these bones were apparently a vertebra and a humerus bone of some gigantic creature. So, while awaiting a reply from Marsh, Lakes dug up more of these quote-unquote colossal bones, and he, he got tired of waiting for Marsh to respond, so he sent a shipment of the bones to Cope.
Okay.
So, yeah. So when Marsh did eventually respond, he paid Lakes and a prospector $100, urging them to keep the finds a secret. But of course, Lakes had already had correspondence with Cope, already sent bones to Cope. So Marsh found out about that. And so he sent a field collector to the Como Bluffs in order to secure the location and the services of the prospector and Lakes. So Marsh then published a description of the discoveries in the American Journal of Science. And he did that. He kind of, like, rushed his description and like findings and everything so that he could get it out before Cope could publish his own interpretation of the finds. Lakes then wrote to Cope that he should send the bones that he had sent him to Marsh, and this was a severe insult to Cope. So
They're so petty.
they're so petty, and this was like a whole ass mess. It was a clusterfuck from start to finish. So there was a second letter, and this one was from a naturalist, O.W. Lucas, and this one went to Cope first. And he had been collecting plants near Canyon City, Colorado, and he came upon an assortment of fossil bones. So he sent this letter, and then he sent some samples to Cope. And so Cope concluded that the dinosaurs were herbivores. He noticed that the specimen was larger than any other previously described, including the ones that Marsh had just published his findings on. So after hearing about these finds, Marsh instructed his field collector and one of his former students to set up a quarry on his behalf near Canyon City, Colorado, because technically he couldn't get into this like archaeological dig because Cope had it, and so he used his underhanded methods to get a quarry near it so that he could like sneak in and find fossils. Basically, Marsh then learned that Lucas, the guy who had sent this second letter, he found that Lucas was finding the best bones and refused to come work for Marsh and was continuing to send them to Cope. So Marsh got super angry. He ordered his people to come back, but he owned this quarry now, and so he had to keep this quarry running. But then the quarry collapsed and nearly killed all of his people. So it was a whole thing. But basically, this setback for Marsh basically like dried up his entire bone supply from the West, and financially hit him really hard. He almost lost all of his people, so it was like a super big setback for Marsh, and then Cope was getting all of these bones. So basically, first letter, Marsh got all the benefits. Second letter, Cope got all the benefits.
Okay.
Now, if you would like to go to slide 9, there is a third letter that gets sent out. So basically at the time of when... What?
I punched my microphone.
Y'all?
I can't help it.
Anyway, so at the time of the first letter, when Lake sent his first letter about his discoveries, the first transcontinental railroad was being built through Wyoming. So this third letter arrived to Marsh, and it was from two men identifying themselves as Harlow and Edwards, and they were workers for the Union Pacific Railroad Company. Their real names were actually William Harlow Reed and William Edwards Carlin. So in their letter, they were going by their middle names. And basically, these two men claimed that they had found large numbers of fossils in Como Bluff and warned that there were others in the area looking for such things, which Marsh took to mean that Cope was in the area. So he sent his student to the Como Bluff in order to like secure this area. So his student sent back a message confirming that there were large quantities of bones, and that it was indeed Cope's men snooping around the area. And
what's that thing that the dad what's that thing that the dad from Fairly Odd Parents says about the neighbor?
Dinkelberg.
Dinkelberg, that's it. That's what I keep imagining. Like, anytime he thinks that other guy's around, he's like, Dinkelberg!
Yes. Yep. Basically. So in order to, like, fully secure this area and to keep Cope out, Marsh quickly sent money to the two railroad workers, and urged them to find more bones and send more fossils. And he was able to strike a preliminary deal with them, even though these two men were unable to cash the check that he sent because he made it out to their pseudonyms, and which is why you don't write letters under pseudonyms, but it's fine.
Dumbass.
And then one of them, Carlin, he decided to actually head to New Haven so that he could deal with Marsh directly and, actually get paid. So they like drew up a contract. There was a monthly fee with additional bonuses. So basically Carlin and Reed became his like bone collectors and everything. And they would get like bonuses based on the importance of the finds. So Marsh also reserved the right to send his own superintendents to supervise the digging if needed, and advised the men to try to keep Cope out of the region. So, yeah, basically Marsh was able to get Carlin and Reed's services, but because Carlin and Reed weren't able to like negotiate better terms, they started to resent their contract and Marsh, because they essentially felt that Marsh had bullied them into this deal.
Mm-hmm.
So it bad vibes, because again, Marsh is not a good businessman. So regardless, he was able to secure the rights to this area, and he got like really good results as far as like bones and fossils went. So that kind of made up for the fact that his like quarry had collapsed and he had basically dug himself into a hole. Haha. And then
Wow.
yes. So Marsh's own collectors like went back east for the winter, but Reed and Carlin sent like carloads of bones through the railroad to Marsh. And so Marsh was able to describe and name a whole bunch of dinosaurs, including like the Stegosaurus, the Allosaurus, the Apatosaurus. So like big name dinosaurs, and he was able to like publish these finds in the American Journal of Science. So yeah. Slide 10, and here is where my PowerPoint goes downhill. Not that it's been great before then. But anyway, so despite Marsh trying to keep Cope out of Como Bluffs and trying to keep everyone from learning like just how rich these bone beds were, word of the discoveries spread rather quickly. And so Carlin and Reed, because they didn't like their contract, also kind of helped spread the rumors. They like didn't go against their contract as far as like bones and all of that, but they were like, you didn't say anything about whether we could talk about it in secret, so we're going to. But yeah, so they leaked information to the Laramie Daily Sentinel, which published an article about the finds in 1878 that exaggerated the price that Marsh had paid for the bones. And Marsh attempted to cover this leak, and in his attempts to cover the leak, he learned that his students and that Carlin and Reed had been visited by a man that was working for Cope, who went by the name of Hayes. And so basically he learned that Cope knew everything. And so Cope then sent his dinosaur rustlers, which I just want to be a dinosaur rustler for the rest of my life. But he sent his dinosaur rustlers to the area in an attempt to quietly steal fossils from under Marsh's nose. And by the winter of 1878, Carlin was dissatisfied with the fact that Marsh wasn't, like, keeping up with his payments. And so he basically began working for Cope instead and letting him into this area so that he could steal bones.
Mm-hmm.
So, slide 11. Again, there's no pictures, doesn't matter. Maybe once it's in the public folder, there will be pictures, doesn't matter. But yeah, so basically, each summer, Cope and Marsh would use their personal wealth to fund expeditions, and then they would spend their winters publishing their discoveries. So, small armies of fossil hunters would descend upon the West in the summers and then be gone in the winters. And they had these, like, huge paleontological digs that lasted for, like, 15 years until 1892. As far as, like, the big, like, incidences, those are what I've covered so far. From, like, this point on, it was mostly just their attentions, and everything moved into, like, publications and newspapers and, like, rumors in society and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, within the scientific community. So, I will get into that in a minute. But basically, by the end of it all, they had both suffered hardships related to weather and within their own, like, sabotage and obstruction of each other. And so they both essentially just, like, dug themselves into a hole, as far as dug themselves and each other into a hole. They both, like, lost funding, used up all of their personal wealth, and by the end of it, they both had, like, such huge backlogs of fossils and bones that there was, like, no way that they could ever make their way through all of them. And everything was getting, like, mixed up together, and it was just a whole hot mess for the paleontological community. Also, just the tensions between each other. So, like, they did such petty shit as far as, like, they would, like, lock each other out of the train station so that their bones had to be, like, hauled down a quarry and blah, blah, blah. Like,
I love it.
I don't know. It was a whole thing. They both treated their workers like shit, so all of their workers quit on them or would, like, just go back and forth between the two sides. It was, I don't know. They were great. Anyway, slide 12. And so in the 1880s, as that, like, progressed, there started to be, like, new people within the field of paleontology who were, like, up and coming. And so all of their workers started working for these other people because they were the highest bidder and they were more reliable and they didn't have this petty feud going on between them. So, yeah, you know. Anyway, both of them, any discoveries that they did made were accompanied by sensational accusations of spying, stealing workers, fake fossils, bribery, like, all this shit. And the two men were so protective of their digging sites that they would actually destroy smaller or damaged fossils to prevent them from falling into their rivals' hands.
Ooh.
Or they would fill in their excavation sites with dirt and rock once they were done there to, like, make it seem like there hadn't been an excavation there so no one would discover new bones.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, like, even while in Como Bluff, Marsh examined his recent finds and then marked several of the, like, locations for destruction and just had them completely, like, plowed over.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
So, and, like, the teams like would go against each other, like both scientist teams of workers, and like it would devolve into them like just like throwing stones at each other. Like I said, whole hot mess, real petty, real destructive for the scientific community, all because of this personal feud between these two. So they also tried to ruin each other's professional credibility, and this is kind of where it like went into like publications and like news sources and stuff like that. Cope had like reconstructed a skeleton of the plesiosaur elasmosaurus, but that was the one where he accidentally put the head on the tail instead of on the neck, because I don't know if you know what a plesiosaur looks like. It looks like Nessie. And so the neck is super long, the tail is kind of short, so he was just like, well, this must be the neck because it's the shorter end. So he put the head on that, and that was the one where like Marsh like revealed the mistake and like put it in a published thing where like, this guy's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's doing. And so Cope had already published that version of the skeleton, and he tried to cover up his mistake by purchasing every single copy of the journal
Oh my god.
that he could find.
Oh man.
Meanwhile, Marsh made sure to publicize the story. So
Yeah.
And so that kind of like hurt Cope's credibility. And then Cope, because he had this like flair for writing, and like this dramatic way of like phrasing everything, he would put out all these articles like super quickly, and so he had this like really rapid output of scientific papers, and they were, you know, they had this dramatic flair to them, but that meant that they weren't always accurate.
Yeah.
And so, because he was putting them out so quickly, making them sound like really great, but it made it easy for Marsh to go back through all of these things and be like, yeah, no, that's wrong. Yeah, no, that's wrong. Here's a spelling error. You're an idiot. Blah, blah, blah. So, so Cope just kept putting out these articles trying to like get his credibility back out there. And Marsh was like, yeah, no, this dude's an idiot. So Marsh, also, I mean, the man's not infallible. So he also put the wrong skull on a skeleton of an apatosaurus and declared it a new genus, the Brontosaurus. So, in case you didn't know, we still had brontosauruses, until like 10 years ago. So we only like just recently figured out that this dude was wrong. But it's all because he put the wrong skull on the skeleton. At least, like, Cope put the right skull, he just put it on the wrong end. Marsh, it was because he had such a backlog of bones that he was, and they all ended up in, like, the same boxes. And so he was like, well, it's with these bones, so this head must go on this neck, sure. Yeah. So, by the late 1880s, public attention to the fighting between Cope and Marsh had faded. It basically, like, their feud kind of just became, like, between the two of them. Like, the scientific community didn't really care anymore. The public didn't care anymore. They were just like, y'all need to work your shit out. Figure it out. But because Marsh had contacts within the U.S. Geological Survey, and with powerful people in Washington, because of like when he did his stuff with Grant and whatnot, he was placed at the head of the Consolidated Government Survey, and that kind of like got him out of the spotlight. So basically, like, Marsh ended up like more well off, I guess, in that way, in that he still had his credibility, and all of that, whereas Cope spent most of his money purchasing the American Naturalist, which is where he had his publication that was wrong. And because he didn't have any allies in higher education, but Marsh did, Cope had a hard time finding employment after, like, he quit his expeditions and all of that. Also because of his personality, because he was argumentative and a jerk and, you know, elitist and all of that. And so he had a hard time finding a job, essentially. So Cope began investing in gold and silver prospects in the West. And then he started going back out to search for fossils himself, because he also couldn't find anyone to work for him because he was an ass. So there were setbacks in mining and a lack of support from the federal government, so Cope's financial situation steadily deteriorated to the point that his fossil collection was his only significant asset. Yeah. And Marsh, on the other hand, he did well for himself in that he secured a job. He had all these higher-ups that he was, like, he knew and he had a good relationship with, but then he decided to alienate himself from even his, like, loyal assistants and, like, his students, all these people, and he refused to share his conclusions that he drew from all of these findings. That, because, like, keep in mind, he wasn't the one going out on these expeditions. It was his students and his assistants and all of that would go out, get these fossils, bones, send them back to Marsh. So he wasn't doing any of the legwork. But Marsh basically alienated himself from all these people and refused to share his conclusions. Plus, he was never good about his payment schedule or any of that. And so he basically just, like, pushed everyone away. And everyone was like, yeah, no, we're not working for you anymore. Mm-hmm. So both of them essentially were, downhill. Yeah. But Cope took a chance to exploit Marsh's vulnerabilities in 1884 because Congress began to investigate the proceedings of the Consolidated Geological Survey, and Cope had become friends with a professor of anatomy at Princeton University, and this friend, Henry Osborne, was like Marsh in a lot of ways. He was slow and methodical, but in that way, he actually proved to be a damaging influence on Marsh. Mm-hmm. And so Cope used that to his advantage. And Cope basically, he gathered together all of the disgruntled workers who would speak out against Marsh and this geological survey, and had his friend basically, like, influence Marsh to be worse at his job, essentially. He was the one who basically, like, pushed him to be a bit more, like, not to pay people, to be slow with his work, all of that stuff. And so that made all of the workers even more disgruntled, so that Cope was able to gather all of these people together to speak out against the survey and against Marsh. So he, like, came up with these allegations against the survey as far as, like, payment and work ethic and all of these things about how it was all not good. Marsh was able to refute most of the charges, and so none of it actually reached, like, the mainstream press. But then Cope had an ally in, he had a friend, William Ballou, he, like, owned a newspaper, and so he, like, convinced this guy to go and, like, write this news article basically denouncing everything that Marsh had ever done, to try and get Marsh out of his presidency of the National Academy of Sciences. Mm-hmm. So, and then Cope got a financial boost from the University of Pennsylvania when they offered him a teaching job, and it just, so basically, like, Marsh was going downhill, Cope was going uphill. Mm-hmm. And so this is basically, like, Cope's final blow to Marsh. Over all of these years, Cope had kept an elaborate journal of every mistake and misdeed that Marsh had ever committed.
Oh my god.
Yeah. And so he had everything in writing, and so he sent it all to this newspaper friend that he had, William Ballou. And Ballou basically just did an entire series of articles that then became like debates between Marsh and Cope. And the scientific community at this point was just like, yeah, no, we're done with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Shut the fuck up. They considered their conduct of this entire time to be like shameful, a bad name for the scientific community, blah, blah, blah. So the entire scientific community was just like, yeah, no, we're done with both of you.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, like, neither one of them had a name for themselves. They both like lost everything, all sort of like credibility. They were both financially ruined, and it was just this whole big thing. And neither one of them was like willing to give it up. Mm-hmm. So basically their rivalry lasted until Cope's death in 1897. And at the end, like, Cope had to sell part of his fossil collections just to be able to like make ends meet, to be able to rent a house. And it was just this whole thing. So I mean, there's like more like smaller details and everything. Basically, like, even on his deathbed, like, Cope tried to get back at Marsh. He like donated his skull to science once he died so that his brain could be measured, hoping that it would be larger than Marsh's brain.
Oh my god.
What?
Yeah.
These two are so fucking petty. Oh my god.
Yeah. Marsh, for his part, did not donate his skull, so we will never know who had the larger brain, blah, blah, blah.
Well, that doesn't matter anyway. Like,
exactly.
That's not how brains work.
Yeah.
Although at the time, that's how they thought brains work. But.
Yes. Yeah. And so basically, they like made a bunch of discoveries that had a lot of scientific value, but they also really harmed the scientific community. They destroyed both their credibility and half their findings, and like were both in financial ruin by the time of their deaths. Like,
was it really worth it, guys?
Right? Like, by pure numbers alone, Marsh won the Bone Wars, I suppose, because he just had more fossils.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. And
but was it worth it?
Yeah.
Cope discovered a total of 56 new dinosaur species, and Marsh discovered 80. But at the end of it, like, yes, they did stuff, and like this is what really sparked the interest in like paleontology and like dinosaurs and fossils and all of this kind of stuff, especially in North America. So like it had some good, but they used their own stupid petty rivalry to do all this fucked up shit. Like,
just petty ass bullshit. That's all it is.
Yeah. It's just two middle-aged white men being middle-aged white men, and I'm not here for it. Anyway, that's all I've really got for you. It was one of those stories that, like, it's interesting, but it also makes me angry because, like, yes, you found all these dinosaurs, but you also did so much fucked up shit.
Yeah.
Like, you destroyed so many fossils. You just... And, like, they didn't even really care about accuracy, like, either one of them. Like, Marsh was more towards being accurate, and Cope was more towards, like, I'm gonna get these findings out there as quickly as possible. But, like, both of them... It's one of those things that, like, I'm not a scientist in any way, but, like, even just reading this, I was like, but why did you do that? Why would you do that? Stop that! But, yeah. So that is the Bone Wars between Cope and Marsh and their petty-ass bullshit.
I love it, and I hate it.
Yeah.
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 And, like I said, some of their findings that were inaccurate lasted up until, like, not that long ago.
Yeah.
Right.
So, because they, like, just went through, like, all the dinosaurs, not all the dinosaurs, but, like, I remember them changing the dinosaur displays at, like, the St. Louis Science Museum because they had discovered that, like, the brontosaurus wasn't a brontosaurus and stuff.
Yeah.
So, and every dinosaur I knew from when I was a dinosaur kid is no longer a dinosaur, so...
We lost our
thanks.
dinosaurs, we lost our
No.
planets.
Right? Like,
Jeez.
I'm gonna need all these old-ass scientists to get on their shit. But anyway, that's all I got for you. That was the Bone
Thank
Wars.
you.
Sorry it was
That was fun.
chaotic.
It's fine.
No, it was good.
Yeah. It was chaotic due to
Those two,
technology
it wasn't
again.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those two idiots.
Our ending is that we have no ending. Bye.
Bye.
Oh shit. Thanks for listening to The Triad. Our music is by Scott Buckley. Our audio is recorded by our sound engineers, Craig Bott and Audrey Credo.
If you like the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, YouTube, and Tumblr as The Triad Podcast.
We're also on Patreon as The Triad. Currently, all Patreon funds will go towards the cost of hosting the show. Each tier has its own rewards, but every patron receives our undying gratitude. Do you have comments, questions, or stories? Email us at thetriadpod@gmail.com. And thank you again for listening to The Triad, where we're spooky but sensitive.